and welcome. I am Catherine Hadro coming to you from St. Peter's Square, all part of EWTN's continuous coverage of the 10th World's Meeting of Families happening right here in Rome, Italy. It has been a packed morning so far with the theme at this World Meeting of Families, Family Love, a Vocation and a Path to Holiness. We thought we would bring you the top highlights, so take a look. I think it will be really beautiful to see, yes, the diversity of all these families, but also the common threads with all of them. And again, I think forgiveness is going to be a common thread with that. Yes. As I mentioned, this is the 10th World's Meeting of Families, but now we want to take a look back at where it all began. The World's Meeting of Families this week is the 10th one in 28 years. It was St. John Paul II who launched the first World's Meeting of Families in 1994, largely as a response to the modern attacks on the family. At that time, the United Nations General Assembly had dubbed 1994 as the International Year of the Family, a year filled with events that promoted abortion and population control advocates. St. John Paul II understood the opportunity to correct and evangelize. The modern-day saint declared the end of 1993 a special Year of the Family for the Church. In 1994, the Polish pontiff took a series of actions to highlight the beauty of the family. He issued a letter for families. He beatified the heroic doctor Gianna Beretta Mala, who gave her life in 1962 to ensure the safe birth of her daughter. John Paul II instructed the Pontifical Council for the Family, now a part of the Dicastery for Laity, Family, and Life. And that same year, the modern-day saint established what would be the inaugural World's Meeting of Families. The event took place in Rome. The 1994 World's Meeting of Families was so successful, it has since become a regular event in the life of the Church, taking place approximately once every 3 years. Out of the 10 World's Meeting of Families so far, 3 were in Rome, including this year's. The other cities have included Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Manila, Philippines, Valencia, Spain, Mexico City, Mexico, Milan, Italy, Philadelphia, USA, and Dublin, Ireland. Now, 28 years since the first World's Meeting of Families, St. John Paul II's vision has become all the more important. 28 years since the World Meeting of Families was first launched. Matthew, can you give us more context as to what prompted St. John Paul II to found it?
Well, John Paul II had a remarkable capacity as Pope to be a prophet, to see where the world was headed. His very first encyclical Redemptor Hominis reflected on the question of man knowing himself and realizing that only in Christ can he find himself. That's important because this prophetic knowledge, this prophetic aspect of his pontificate led him in the early 1990s to realize that the world was now facing a crisis of families, that it was only going to get worse, and he wanted to begin planting seeds as a kind of antidote to that. Just in 1994, we had the UN meeting on the families. We had the infamous Cairo conference that was around that same time that brought delegates from all over the world, including Hillary Clinton. And its agenda was very clear, the promotion of abortion and contraception and alternate families that I know we want to talk a lot more about today. So in reflecting on that, John Paul began doing a series of events. He sent a letter to families, and he, of course, very famously beatified, canonized Gianna Maria Mola. But then he also wanted to establish a parallel to the World Youth Days that he himself had started in 1985, and that was the World Meeting of Families, to bring families together from all over the world, to strengthen family life, and then to send them back into their own environments as heralds and as messengers, as witnesses to family life.
It's important to say that St. John Paul II had a very strong devotion to family life. He was known in his early priesthood to actually constantly be surrounded by young families. So speaking of accompanying families in the first years of their marriage, he did this regularly and helped with their children and, you know, helped to, always had youth around him, always had young families. And I think that was because he himself had lost most of his family by the time he was 21.
There are famous photographs of John Paul II out with young families,
Hiking.
canoeing.
Yes.
I mean, this is one of the great adventurers as a pope, out on hikes and mountainsides and skiing. But he was always there with young families. And to look back, I think, on that catechesis, what he was teaching them, that he brought also from that lived experience with families into his subsequent teachings, including the famous book Love and Responsibility.
Love and Responsibility, which was published when he was a bishop. It was, in fact, a remarkable book. It got into the very, not just the theological foundations of a good marriage and a good relationship between men and women, but also into some of the very gritty details that married couples face in their life together, in their life in the world. And of course, that's the precursor for what became eventually, these Wednesday audience talks that we now know as the Theology of the Body, which itself was supposed to be a book that he was going to publish in 1978, 1979. And the audiences, we now know, were simply fragments of the book that he cut up into pieces so he could give every Wednesday.
And St. John Paul II, I mean, talk about suffering within the family.
Yes.
How did the suffering within his own family life shape him and eventually shape his papacy?
Well, there were a number of ways that we can look at that question. It's a great question. Within his own life, he lost his own family. He saw the impact of loss. But then let's also remember the era in which he grew up and the era in which he served as a priest and then a bishop. He grew up and was studying for the seminary, for the priesthood, in one of the worst and darkest periods in human history. We could see that in the Second World War with the Nazi invasion of Poland and the implications that had for the Polish people, for the life of the Catholic Church, but also for just family life. The obliteration of any semblance of normality in family life. That ends, and instead of liberation, you end up with a despotic, atheistic, communist regime being planted in Poland. And the impact that then would have on the family, in which family life was replaced by the state. Something that John Paul was very concerned about. And he again saw the impact of the state, of ideology, an atheist ideology on family life, something that we're seeing now more and more today.
I was about to say.
So all of this then led him to understand the need to strengthen and support the family, but then to equip the family to deal with these great cultural tides, these ideological tides, and that oppression.
It's important also to say that it was his family, and it's particularly his father. Yesterday we were talking to various bishops and clerics, and we'd been asking, how did your own family help you to discern your vocation? That, for St. John Paul II, it was his father, who had a very robust, devout Catholic life, who prayed many times a day, and Wojtyła, young Karol Wojtyła, would see him on his knees in prayer constantly. And so it was that prayer life, John Paul later would acknowledge, was really the seedbed of his own vocation to the priesthood. I mean, imagine where the church would be had young Karol Wojtyła not had those experiences, all those experiences of darkness, Matthew, and what that did for him and helped him become the priest, the bishop, and then the pope he became.
Participants explored 4 critical questions related to the renewal of Catholic family life. Number 1, in light of the Catholic vision of families, are Catholic families called to relate differently to each other than our non-Catholic or non-Christian counterparts?
Number 2, given that most practices associated with Catholic spirituality are drawn from the monastic and clerical traditions and can be difficult to integrate into family life, what would an authentic domestic church-based spirituality look like in practice?
Third, because so many of the church's ministry efforts are spent chasing after sheep that should never have been lost in the first place, children raised in Catholic homes, what more can be done to help Catholic families be forges of intentional discipleship and raise the next generation of intentional disciples?
And fourth, how can Catholic families be equipped to participate more effectively in the life and mission of the Church, serving as the primary outpost of evangelization and positive social change?
So for 3 days, attendees presented research, prayed together, and engaged in discussions intended to offer a coherent response to these questions. 2 significant insights emerged from this effort.
The first was the need for a practical definition of the term domestic church. Although the Catechism theologically defines a domestic church as a specific revelation of ecclesial communion, that definition offers little practical insight into what it requires to establish or maintain a healthy, dynamic domestic church life. Drawing on the research presented at the symposium, we developed a working definition of domestic church as a household of persons united to God and each other through the sacramental life of the church and committed to living out the Christian Trinitarian vision of love in their relationships with each other and the world.
The more a particular domestic church reflects this vision, the more that household already is a domestic church. By contrast, the more a specific household struggles to reflect that vision, the more that household is being called to become an even more dynamic domestic church. And it's worth noting that every family whose witness we heard last night can be found somewhere on the continuum of this working definition.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning to you all.
Nous sommes Alexis et Glorios.
We are Alexis and Glorios. As you heard, we come from Burundi, a small country in East Africa. We've been married for 19 years. We have 3 children. Feliz, 18 years old, Joy, 16, Inez, 14. And we thank God, who is always by our side, to reassure us and accompany us in our journey as spouses. Spouses who have chosen to found their home in the faith of God love. We're here to share with you our small contribution through our life as a family to the construction, the edification of the church. And this presentation is not the result of our research. It is the result of our life that we have been able to live with the support of God. So it's the result of the experience of our family as a small domestic church, but also with our community and our local church. Before we got married, we had the grace to live in a dynamic Christian community where it was common to see everyone, priests, lay people, families, young people and children, determined to live the gospel and witness through the little things of everyday life and to give of themselves without considering the cost. With this community, we have lived very beautiful experiences that prove to us that radical and authentic Christian life is indeed possible. And during our engagement, we had realized that we each had the thirst to see ourselves remain in God and live an authentic Christian life. The first days of our marriage, we had started to pray together in our room, just the 2 of us. And then we participated in a meeting, a community meeting, and we started praying in all different forms, and we have talked about also this. And when we came back, we decided to organize sessions of prayers, inviting everyone and to meet with us in the living room. This has led to beautiful experiences. And since then, families have decided to organize these prayer sessions, and this is something that we are still doing. And the fruit of this was peace, patience, providence, enlightenment.
Pour ce qui est de l'apostolat dans l'Église, il semblait pour nous très naturel de continuer le programme dans la commission diocésaine pour l'apostolat de l'Aïe, où je servais même avant. Nous nous sommes mariés dans la période où l'Église locale avait le programme de renforcer les jeunes à travers des forums et d'autres activités.
Basically reaching
Nous
out to young
étions
people
appelés
through
à
different kinds of
participer
activities.
soit dans
And we
l'organisation
were
ou
invited
dans
to take part in the
l'accueil ou
organization
l'hébergement
of
des
these
jeunes
events,
qui
but
venaient de
also
loin.
in hosting
À un
young
autre moment,
people who came
l'Église
from
locale avait
distant
l'honneur
places.
d'accueillir la Croix
And the
des
local
Jeunes
church had the
que nous
honor
avions eu la grâce
of
d'accompagner d'un diocèse à
hosting
l'autre.
the cross of young people,
Il
la Croix des
arrivait des
Jeunes.
fois où on
We
rentrait tard et
accompanied from one
fatigué,
diocese to
mais plein
another.
de joie.
And sometimes we
Le
would
prêtre
come back home
chargé
very
de
late, we were
l'apostolat des
exhausted, but we
laïcs,
were filled
avant
with
de
joy.
rentrer,
And the
devait
priest
se
who was in
rassurer
charge
que
of
tout
the
le monde
apostolate of the
est bien
laity
arrivé chez soi.
before going back home, he made sure that everyone reached their homes safely. He would sometimes escort us back home. And in this way, we established a very strong bond and relationship between the members of the Commission and my family. In this way, our family became ever more enriched thanks to the grace of an apostolate that was lived within the Church, but the Church in turn could enjoy the graces coming from our sacrament of matrimony that was expressed through this renewed openness and willingness strengthened by our spousal love. The birth of children is a gift that enhances our joy and our sense of responsibility as parents. We felt the responsibilities of having our children baptized as soon as possible. At some point, we felt the need of see how to basically engage in birth control, and we followed the natural method recommended by the Church, and this allowed us to cleanse our spousal relationship, thinking that the other is not just an instrument for pleasure, but what is rewarding is our mutual love. Hence, we feel that freedom that the children of God enjoy, and prayer makes our home a domestic church where our children receive the catechesis. And during the Rosary, the prayer of the Rosary, we took this opportunity to ponder the mysteries and explaining in what context the mysteries happened. And in this way, in a very simple way, we have started telling the story of salvation to our children who discovered basically God's power in our daily life, in our family. And this was supported by the Church in their formation when they prepared for the different sacraments, but also through their participation in the activities of the community. And we pray to make sure that this tiny seed might then grow up into a big tree for the joy of Mary and the glory of God. We always felt respect and love towards consecrated people. We have very fruitful relations with them. Sometimes we have the grace of welcoming in our home a priest, or maybe we go and visit a priest in his parish. But we see that they trust us. And one day, we went to visit a priest who was our friend when he was the parish priest in a very remote village. And when he saw us, he was so happy. He thanked us because our presence was already a wonderful testimony. And the next day, on Sunday, he invited us to accompany him in one of the most remote, let's say, churches in his parish area. And at the end of the homily, he asked us to sing something to the faithful. We had not prepared anything, and so we decided to share with the faithful in the church everything that we were experiencing. So basically our daily life as a couple, and why we had went to visit the parish priest. And the parishioners thanked us really. They really appreciated our conversation with them. And then my husband and myself, we found ourselves also experiencing the reality of Radio Maria. I had a weekly column, and instead, my husband, he was the accountant, basically auditing the accounts of Radio Maria, and we were very happy to provide this service to the church. Once again, but always remaining ready to serve the Church, God has never stopped renewing His invitation to us to follow Him. Our yes has always been spontaneous and unconditional. God did not want to look at our home only as a domestic church, but He also wants us to become a missionary church alongside the pastors of the church. And if it seems that we don't understand, He has His own way to make us understand. After 5 years of marriage, I clearly realized that God was calling me to make an additional step forward. And It was the opening of the year of St. Paul, June 2008. In his homily, the priest praised the missionary action of St. Paul and reminded us that we're all called to be missionaries by the grace of baptism. And I asked myself, me too? Should I do this as well? And I was lost in thought, contemplating the courage, bravery, and dynamism of this great apostle. And I clearly felt God's call to follow him. Of course, the first person that I informed was Gloriose.
C'est plutôt le moment de travailler pour le développement familial.
That was the time when I was working hard for the family, and instead she started telling me about this new thing.
C'est par après que Dieu m'a contourné et m'a invité autrement.
Stop talking about this for a while. But then the Lord sent us another powerful sign.
Le troisième de nos enfants est tombé malade
because our third child
d'une maladie très grave qu'on ne pouvait pas soigner.
He was
J'étais découragée.
very severely
Sur le chemin de l'hôpital, je
on my way
regardais
to the
l'enfant
hospital, I was looking
et je le demandais
at our
encore à
child,
Jésus
and
en lui
I
disant,
asked Jesus,
Jésus, si tu me donnes
Jesus,
cet enfant, je te
if you
l'offrirai.
heal this child,
Mais au fond de moi,
will give
j'ai
my child
senti
to
une
you.
voix qui me disait,
and in my spirit,
Je te
a
veux, toi
voice
aussi.
clearly answered me.
Et j'ai
I
tout de
want
suite
you
dit
too.
oui dans
And I
mon
immediately
cœur,
said yes in
comprenant
my
en
heart,
effet que ce n'est pas moi de
understanding in
décider
fact
de la
that
vie
it's
des
not up to
enfants,
me to
mais
decide
par
on the
contre
life
que
of our
ma vie, je
children. But on the other
peux
hand,
la
that
confier,
my life is
l'abandonner à
not
Dieu.
mine.
J'étais
And I
contente. Ce
relinquished my
jour-là,
life and I
de
gave it to
retour à
God.
la
I was
maison,
happy that day.
je
And
l'ai
back home,
partagé moi aussi
I shared
à
this with
Alexis
Alexis,
et ensemble,
and together
nous avons
we
compris que
realized
Dieu veut nous
that
faire
God
de nouveaux
wanted
pas.
us to make
Nous
new
l'avons
steps
partagé
forward.
à qui a la grâce
And
de nous
we
aider et
share
nous
this with those who
accompagner.
have the grace to help
Face à la
accompany
maladie,
us.
nous
In the
avons
face of illness,
redécouvert nos
we
limites
rediscovered
et
our
le pouvoir
limitation
de
and God's
Dieu
power
à nous tirer
to pull
d'affaire.
us through.
Dieu nous a montré la
God showed us the
solidarité et la prière
solidarity
des
and the
familles
prayers
dans le
of the
monde,
families in the world,
la
the
proximité de
closeness of
l'Église,
the church,
et surtout
and
nous
above
avons
all,
touché du doigt
we
l'intervention
really
de Dieu et son
experienced the
immense amour
intervention
pour
of
ses
God and
enfants.
His immense love for
Car
His
l'enfant
children.
a été
For the
soigné
child
et
was
a pu
healed
guérir.
and was able to recover,
Convaincu par son
overcome by
amour
His
et
love,
convaincu
convinced that
qu'il veut que
He
nous
wants
témoignions
us
de cet
to
appel.
testify to this love.
De cet amour, nous avons encore
We again
avoué et renouvelé
confessed
notre
and
élan
renewed
apostolique
our
comme nouvel
apostolic
engagement dans la
pride as a new
vocation du
commitment in the
mariage.
vocation of marriage.
Quelques années plus tard,
A few
il nous a été
years
confié
later, we were
l'apostolat des
entrusted with the
familles
apostolate of
avec un
families
regard
with a special
particulier sur les
focus on
jeunes
young couples.
À travers cet
Through this
apostolat,
apostolate,
nous avons
we
expérimenté
experienced mutual
l'évangélisation
evangelization,
laissant le seul grand maître au milieu de
letting
nous, nous entraîner à
the
sa
one
suite.
great master in our midst lead us to follow
Elles
him.
ont été des années riches
Those have been
d'expériences,
years
de
rich in
prières,
experiences,
d'activités
prayer,
ensemble, de
activities
solidarité.
together, and solidarity.
Nous avons redécouvert la
We
beauté du
rediscover
couple,
the beauty
la providence
of the
divine,
couple, divine
l'engagement et la
providence,
décision du
the
jeune
commitment
couple à
and the
vivre selon
decision
l'évangile
of young
et de
couples
se
to live
rendre
according
compte
to
de
the
ce que c'est
gospel
possible.
and to
Après ces rencontres,
realize
nous sommes
that
toujours
this is
rentrés
possible.
évangélisés,
And after these
plus
meetings, we
qu'avant,
always return
et
to
enrichis des
evangelize more than
expériences des
before and enriched by the experiences
À
of other
travers
couples.
l'Église, Dieu nous a
Through the
offert
church,
des occasions
God
pour
offered us
concrétiser notre
opportunities to make
engagement.
our commitment concrete.
Un jour, une
One
religieuse
day,
que nous avions connue dans une grande
a woman
rencontre
religious
nous a
whom we had
appelés
met
pour
in a
nous
large
confier un
meeting
jeune
called us
couple
to
d'un
entrust
pays
us with a
lointain
young couple from a
qui ne
distant
parlait même
country
pas notre
who did
langue.
not even speak our language.
Ce couple venait
This
de se
couple
marier
had just
et
gotten
voulait
married
faire leur voyage de
and
noces.
wanted to
Ils cherchaient
go
un
on their
logement dans
honeymoon,
notre
and they were
pays à
looking
moins
for
de
accommodation in our country
Nous
at a
avons
lower
senti que
cost.
c'est plutôt un appel
We
de
felt that
Jésus
this was rather a
d'offrir
call from
notre
Jesus
maison.
to offer our house.
Ce couple était très
So this couple
content
was so
et
happy,
ils ont passé une
and they
semaine
spent
chez
a
nous
week
dans
in
la
our
joie.
house in joy.
De très bonnes relations
Very
ont vu
good
le jour
relationships
entre nos
have
familles.
developed between our
Et de
families
temps
in the
en temps,
meantime,
nous
and
allons
from
les
time to
visiter dans
time,
leur
we
pays
go visit them
où un
in
accueil
their
très
country,
chaleureux nous est toujours
where we're
réservé.
always
Ces
welcomed
derniers temps,
warmly.
notre regard va
And
au-delà des
lately, we're
familles
looking
locales
beyond local
afin de
families
construire un
to
réseau
build a
plus
more
régional.
regional network in East Africa.
Nous sommes reconnaissants
And
à
we are
l'Église, notre
grateful
mère,
to the
qui n'a pas
church,
cessé
our
de
mother,
nous favoriser
that
et
has
nous donner
never
la chance de
stopped
collaborer avec construire
really
l'Église.
providing us with
Nous remercions
opportunities
Dieu
to
qui nous a
build
donné
the
la grâce
church.
d'être
And we
ici
thank
avec
God
vous dans cette rencontre.
that has given us the grace
C'est un
to
grand
meet
don
with you
pour nous.
all in this
Nous vous
gathering.
remercions.
We thank you.
Sia laudato Gesù Cristo.
Let's praise God.
Je remercie le Seigneur.
I would like to thank
et les
God and the
organisateurs
organizer
de cette
of
rencontre
this meeting
pour la confiance
for
qu'ils nous ont donnée et
trusting us
l'opportunité
and giving
d'être au
us the
service de
possibility
l'Église.
to be at the service of the church.
Savez-vous
Do you
que la
know
première
where
fois dans
in
la
the
Bible,
Bible
Dieu
God
dit de
first
quelque
says
chose
that
qui n'est pas
something is
bonne?
not good? You guessed it right, it's in Genesis 2:18. After seeing that everything he created was good, God said, "It is not good that man should be alone." Why? Because created in the image of a God who is a trinity of relationships, that is to say relational, man is also relational. That is to say we are made to be loved and to love, to open ourselves, to reach out, but also to be loved. Outside of love, which is its very essence a relationship, man can find neither peace nor joy. The love of which we speak has the form of that is very precise, the form of a cross. It consists of two necessary and interdependent dimensions, a vertical dimension and a horizontal dimension. The early church was an urban church made up of families. Christians lived as Act of the Apostles testifies, united in charity, sharing, prayer, the Word of God, and breaking up of bread.
La famille est le premier lieu
Family
d'expérience et
is
d'épanouissement
the
de
first
notre
place of
nature
experience and
relationnelle.
fulfillment of our
Donc, le
relational
premier lieu de
nature, therefore is the
sainteté, elle
first
est
place of
l'Église
holiness.
domestique.
It is the
Elle ne peut
domestic
pas
church.
se refermer sur
But it
elle-même
cannot
et
close
se couper des autres
up
familles.
in itself
Elle se
and
couperait
cut
du corps
itself
mystique qu'est
off
l'Église.
from other families. It
Par
will
leur
cut itself
ouverture
off from
les
the
unes vers
mystical
les
body of
autres,
the
les
church.
familles se
By
fortifient
their
et
openness to
s'ouvrent
one another,
davantage à
families
leur
are
tête
strengthened
qui
and
les
become more
unifie
open
toutes,
to their head,
c'est-à-dire
who
le Christ.
unifies them all, that is to
En des
say,
mots plus
Christ.
simples, nous
In
avons
simpler
besoin des uns
words,
des
we need
autres
each
pour
other to
rester
remain
ancrés dans la
anchored
foi,
in the
pour
faith,
grandir
to grow
humainement et
humanly
spirituellement
and
et pour être
spiritually,
Église.
and to be a
La
church.
pandémie
The
nous a fait
pandemic
vivre
has made
dans tout
us
notre être la
experience
laideur de
the
l'isolation et de la
ugliness of
solitude.
isolation
Il
and
n'est pas bon
loneliness.
que la famille
It's
soit
not
seule.
good that the family is alone.
Mais cette
But
isolation, on
this
la vivait déjà
isolation
avant la
was already
pandémie.
experienced before the
Une
pandemic.
vie frénétique et des
A
emplois du
hectic,
temps
busy
colossaux,
life
entre autres, nous l'imposaient.
was one of the main causes of
Beaucoup de familles
isolation.
chrétiennes
Many
souffrent de
Christian
solitude
families
et de
suffer
manque
from
d'amitié dans le
loneliness
Christ.
and lack of
Pour remédier à
friendship.
cela, nous vivons un modèle de communion entre
To
familles
remedy
chrétiennes
this, we live a
qui
model
est un lieu de
of
croissance
communion
pour tous.
between Christian
Il n'y a
families
aucune
as a
invention
place of
ici,
growth for all.
juste un rassemblement
Nothing new
d'éléments qui
invented,
répondent
but
aux
just trying to
besoins de la
find ways to
famille
respond to
et
the
qui
needs
trouvent
of
sa
the
racine
family
dans la
being
parole
fully
de Dieu.
rooted in the Word of God.
La communauté
The
de
family
famille rassemble
community
jusqu'à 6
gathers
couples
up
unis
to
par le
6
sacrement du
couples
mariage.
united by the
Au-delà de ce
sacrament
nom,
of
une
marriage.
autre communauté est formée.
Then another community
Pleinement
is set
insérée
up.
dans l'église
Well
locale,
rooted
la
in the local
communauté
church, the community is
accompagnée
accompanied
par un
by
aumônier.
a
Et sa
chaplain.
présence aux rencontres
Even if
n'est
his
pas nécessaire.
presence at all meetings
Les
is
couples se
not
rencontrent
necessary.
une
The
à deux fois
couples
par
meet
mois
once or
pour prier
twice a
ensemble,
month to pray
vivre la
together,
communion
to live
fraternelle
fraternal
et se
communion,
former
and to
pour
form
ensuite
themselves
être
in
au
order to
service
be at the
des frères
service
et
of their brothers and
évangéliser.
sisters and to
Les rencontres
evangelize.
sont
The meetings
constituées
are
des moments
organized
suivants.
as follows.
Le premier
First,
est un temps de prière
prayer.
et de louange. Se mettre en présence
putting
de Dieu,
ourselves
être
in the
conscient
front
qu'il
of
est parmi
God in
nous,
His
car nous
presence, being
sommes
aware that
réunis
He
en
is
son nom.
amongst us, because we
Demander à son
gather in His
esprit de
name
prier
as
en
a
nous
Spirit
et
to
de
pray
guider
with
la
us,
rencontre.
in us, and to guide the meeting.
Le deuxième temps est une lecture de la
Then,
Bible
reading
avec
of the Bible
méditation
with
de chacun des
meditation by each
participants
participant
sur les
on
lumières
how
que
the
porte cette
Word
parole sur sa vie,
enlightens his or her life,
suivi d'un
followed
enseignement
by
sur un aspect de
teaching
la
on the
foi
aspect of
chrétienne
Christian
à la
faith
lumière du
in the
texte
light
médité.
of the meditated
La
text.
lecture de la Bible
The
peut
reading
suivre
of the
un
Bible
programme
can follow
annuel
an hour
défini par la
program
paroisse
defined by the
ou
parish
par
or
le
by the
diocèse.
dioceses.
L'approfondissement
A
du texte
5-minute
biblique
video
et la
by the
catéchèse qui en découle
dioceses or
sera
parish
donné
is
aux
shown to
communautés
the
sous forme
community
d'une vidéo par le diocèse.
to give an insight on
Le
the
troisième
biblical
est un
text.
temps de formation
Third,
humaine.
human
Il a
formation
pour but d'aider les
intended to
couples
help
à
couples
surmonter leurs
overcome
défis
their
concrets.
concrete challenges.
L'éventail des thèmes
The
est
range
très
of
large
themes is very
et il se
wide
divise en
and
deux axes
can be
principaux.
broadly split up into two groups.
Le premier
First,
axe ouvre les
the
défis de la vie
challenges of
conjugale.
married life.
Voici quelques
Here
exemples
are
de
some
thèmes qui
examples
peuvent
of
être
topics that
abordés.
can be addressed.
1.
First,
Les principes de
principles
l'intelligence
of
émotionnelle
emotional
et
and relational
relationnelle pour garder le
intelligence
mariage
to
sain.
keep the marriage
Est-ce que
healthy.
je connais
Do
les
I know
besoins
my
émotionnels
other
de mon
half's
mari
emotional
ou
needs?
de mon autre moitié et je
How
sais
to
comment
meet
les
them?
satisfaire?
Or
Ou est-ce
am
que je
I
projette sur lui
projecting
ou
my
elle
own
mes propres goûts?
tastes onto him or
Suis-je
her?
consciente de
Am I aware of the
l'importance que l'affection
importance
a pour
of
mon mari
affection for
ou de
my
l'importance
husband
d'une
or the
attention
importance of
indivisée
undivided
par ma
attention
femme?
for my wife?
Bref,
In short, how do we keep our marriage alive, and how do we protect it from the slow death of monotony and neglect?
Un deuxième point aborderait les principes de
Second, the principle
communication,
of
de
communication,
négociation et de gestion
negotiation,
des
management
différences et
of
des
differences
conflits au
and
sein du
conflicts within the
Est-ce que
couple.
nous
Do
communiquons
we
clairement nos
communicate
idées
our
sans
ideas
critique
clearly without
destructrice?
destructive criticism?
Reconnaissons-nous nos
Do we
fautes et demandons
acknowledge our
pardon?
faults and ask for
Savons-nous
forgiveness?
éviter
How do
le
we
blâme
avoid
et le
hurting
dénigrement de
or
l'autre? Comment
manipulation
éviter de
of the
blesser
other
ou de manipuler
who
celui
has
ou celle
entrusted
qui m'a
me
confié
with
son
his
cœur?
or her
Le
heart?
troisième point,
Third,
comment prier
how do we
ensemble
pray
et l'un
together
pour l'autre?
and one for each
Quatre,
other?
comment vivre ensemble et
And
surmonter
fourth,
les
how do
moments
we
de
live
crise
together
et
and
de
overcome
traumatisme?
moments of crisis and
De quoi mon
trauma?
mari ou
What
ma
does my
femme
husband
a
or wife
besoin
need
quand il ou
when
elle
he or
souffre?
she is suffering?
Comment bien
How
l'écouter
do I listen
et
to
l'aider
him
à
or her
exprimer sa douleur?
and help him or
Comment
her
aime-t-elle
express
ou aime-t-il
pain?
être
How does
consolé?
he or she like to
Comment
be
faire face
comforted?
à de grandes
How do
pertes
we
dans
deal
notre
with
vie?
great
La
losses
mort
in our
d'un être
lives,
cher,
the death
la
of a
souffrance
loved
de la
one,
guerre
the suffering
et de
of war
l'asile?
and asylum?
5.
Number 5, how do we manage our time and finances? Number 6, how do we take care of ourselves and avoid burnout? Number 7, sexuality. Do we receive and live it as a wonderful gift from God or as a necessary evil? Is it healthy and vibrant, or is it a place of misunderstanding, frustration and aversion? How do we talk about it, improve it? And our secret addictions, how do we get out of them? We could add many other topics in this group. Those we mention are just examples. We'd rather have plenty of other issues. Second group covers the challenges of parenthood. Here are some examples of topics that can be addressed. Number 1, how do we pass on the faith to our children? How can we ensure that being a Christian is not a simple transmission of tradition and just a list of permits and prohibition, but a true, real encounter with Jesus? How do we pray with them and for them? How do we bless them? Number 2, how do we raise healthy and virtuous children who are able to identify, manage, and express their own emotions like anger, fear, sadness? Who are not afraid to talk to us about themselves, children who know how to relate to others, able to be caring while drawing boundaries and respecting the boundaries of others. Number 3, communication and negotiation with our children. Number 4, how do we accompany our children in their adolescence? How do we live it with them as a moment of grace? Number 5, how do we talk to our children about sexuality and affections? Because if we do not teach them how to do it, somebody else will do it. How do we talk about attraction, true love, body, beauty, sacredness of their body? How to talk to them about false love based on the exploitation of the other and oneself? How to protect them from a sick sexuality, from pornography, and how to help them get rid of it? Number 6, how do we protect and awake our children to the different addictions that threaten them? Number 7, how do we talk to them about the anthropological and ethical anti-Christian models of societies in which they live, and unfortunately also the education system at national level? This human formation is necessary, but all Christian families not all Christian families have access to it because of lack of resources or time. The community gives them this opportunity, but formation must be given by an expert, deeply Christian, or at least not in opposition to Christian principles. The themes of human formation can also be defined over a year and sent to the communities of couples either in an audio clip or in a video clip. Fourth part of the meeting is a time of sharing and consolation. During this fourth time of the meeting, couples who wish to do so can share their joys, but also their challenges and sorrows. The best exercise of charity is to come out of myself and reach out and enjoy the sorry and share the sorrows of my brothers and sisters if they were my own. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. This is the antidote par excellence to the jealousy and envy that destroy all charity and community. It is important to consider the importance of consolation. The best remedy for suffering is consolation. What is it? It's an attentive and benevolent presence of a person with us in the midst of our suffering. Someone who doesn't put the blame on us. It does not even encouraging, but who is sharing our pain and love us. Jesus gave us an enlightening example when he wept with Mary and Martha at the death of their brother. Even though he came on the purpose to raise him from the dead, he himself asked to be comforted in the Garden of Olives by asking his disciples to watch over him. Faced with the failures of friends and not wanting his son to suffer alone, the Father sent him an angel to console him during his agony. The importance of consolation of brother and sister cannot be overemphasized. Solitude makes pain unbearable, while the charity of consolation relieves it. Number 5 is a prayer with brothers and sisters. After sharing and knowing the joys and challenges and pain of each other, we have to pray together. A prayer that is not limited to promise in the future, however serious and faithful it may be, but a prayer now, hic nunc, in the present, in front of the person, out and loud, so that the sister or brother may hear the blessing and intercession of his brother and sister for him or her. This is a profoundly biblical tradition that flows from our baptismal priesthood. Number 6 is a final prayer of thanksgiving, where brothers and sisters raise their eyes to God in expectation of this face-to-face encounter, of this eternal embrace before which and for which all the sufferings of this world are nothing. Number 6, recreational time. So we can have a dinner, board game, or any recreational activity. In addition to these meetings, the community live through strong moments during the year with other family communities of the dioceses, retreats, pilgrimage, etc. What are the advantages of community of Christian families? It's not only spiritual advantages, but offer the advantage of catechetical human formation that facilitates the action of grace and the well-being of families. It creates a network of solidarity in a world where large families are more geographically spread out due to professional constraint, immigration, or wars, where many Christian families find themselves really far from their churches, society, culture, and families of origin, stranger in a cold, individualistic world with all the burden that implies for parents and children. This community of Christian families will be a place of solidarity, spiritual, affective, logistical solidarity, childcare, evening studies, visiting the sick, supporting mourning, referral to the right pediatrician, plumber, etc. An opportunity for all to live charity. It's a place where healthy and holy friendships are forged, not only between parents, but also between children. Good friends are essential for our children so that they don't get lost in a world more and more opposed to Christ. Bad companies and bad friends can really impact negatively. And last but not least, that this community has the strength to be missionary. Living Christ, it has the audacity and the passion to offer him to others so that they may have a life and have it in abundance. John 10:10. But thus, by evangelizing, invite other families, colleagues, neighbors, friends to come and see these communities grow and multiply themselves. We would like to thank you very much for your attention, and the Holy Family pray for us.
We've been monitoring all the talk so far. We're going to continue to do so. The first panel just wrapped up, and it was on spouses and priests together to build the church. Really, this relationship between spouses and priests. And we were just discussing the couple from Lebanon.
Yes.
Now, this couple from Lebanon, they talked about the need for community and how they bring 6 married couples together in their local parish and have this community of married couples, and they go through certain questions and they talk about this together.
And one of the questions that they go through is how they communicate with their children.
Right.
Before the break, we were just talking about this question of communicating to children about sexuality and how important that is.
Yes.
For married couples to do, for mother and father to do. Otherwise, and Matthew mentioned it, things creep in. I was saying right before the break that studies have shown 3 out of 5 American men are addicted to pornography. That's quite a staggering number.
Right.
Other sorts of numbers on that is that the pornography industry grosses more money than all 4 major league sports in the United States annually combined.
It's a distortion and mockery of the sacrament of
Absolutely.
marriage. And there's the epidemic at the married level with grown men, but it's seeping into younger and younger children.
That's
as well.
exactly right, because of the access to phones and smartphones, and it's everywhere. And, this is a problem that we face on a pastoral level, but it's a problem that parents face because children younger and younger are not only being exposed to pornography and sexualized content, we also have the reverse problem that children are being sexualized by the culture.
Well, we're seeing in research and studies that children at an increasingly young age, any child who has access to any sort of a phone or access to the internet is going to see or encounter pornography with its devastating effects.
So prevalent.
When we combine that with what we know now, and especially in many schools and elsewhere, is what you're saying, Father, the deliberate sexualization of children. And then, as they get a little older and they're introduced to social media, platforms like TikTok and others, where they can begin to face additional social pressures, that indoctrination into gender ideology, you're looking at a very, very difficult set of circumstances for parents to contend with as they're trying to raise their children faithfully, but also to be respecting themselves.
And in some places in the country, in the United States and in Canada, we know that it is happening, that some school districts, some school programs are in fact talking about sexual issues and sexuality with children, and explicitly saying that parents aren't invited and parents aren't permitted to know the content of what they're being told. I mean, I think at that point, I'm pulling my kids out. At that point, I'm having a conversation with the superintendent. I'm bringing several parents and my hypothetical kids. Yes, absolutely. But at that point, I'm really angry at that point.
Well, that's right. But then you have the intervention of the state. We're seeing in places like Canada, in Scotland, where they're introducing new laws and regulations where parents are being completely excluded from these discussions.
This attempt to replace the parent, and again, the parent is irreplaceable, and I think that will be interesting to see if the topic of education does come up. And I wonder, this epidemic of pornography, how this was amplified during the coronavirus pandemic, when children so young were just on technology alone for kindergarten, and we're isolated more than ever. This is a huge problem in families.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, you bring up the COVID pandemic, and I'm sorry we still talk about that, but it affected all of us so profoundly for 2 years. And it certainly affected families. In the United States, with all of the lockdown and shutdowns of schools, married couples, moms and dads having to have their children home all day while they were supposedly trying to work. We know now, for instance, in various school systems, New York City, they've done some studies, 13% of children in the public school system of New York City have yet to return to public schooling.
Thank you for the invitation to speak today about the reasons why we should pair our elders with young people and about ways that we might do that. I come to you not as a pastoral minister, but as a church historian who spends most of his life in the ancient and medieval worlds and who wondered how past societies treated their elders. Looking for inspiration, I decided to read the Bible. Being Catholic, I had never read the Bible. Start to finish, and note how elders were portrayed across centuries in different genres from multiple perspectives. This resulted in a book, Ageless Wisdom, Lifetime Lessons from the Bible, and I'd like to draw on some of that material today for our work. My goal is that I will provide context and that your own creativity, your experience, and your cultures will produce pastoral impact, as my family has tried to do with our own daughter, Grace, and her grandparents. My parents, Joan and Anthony, my father now gone to God, and my wife Karen's parents, Catherine and Bob. Some stark facts. In my own country, every single day, 10,000 people turn 65. In 2008, 7% of the world's population was over 65. In 2040, 20% of the world's population will be over 65. That's 1 in 5 people on the planet. A statistic that has never before happened in human history. And I don't think we're prepared. What are the implications for health care, for housing, for food, for mental health services, for government aid, and pastoral care, which is our focus today? Let's get out in front of the issue with good advanced planning. Our recent popes have been leading the way. In 1980, John Paul II told the International Forum on Active Aging that older men and women play a role in the continuity of generations by the charism of bridging the gap. Benedict, visiting a London nursing home in 2010, said, quote, "As advances in medicine and other factors lead to increased longevity, it's important to recognize the presence of growing numbers of older people as a blessing for society. Every generation can learn from the experience and wisdom of the generation that preceded it. Indeed, the provision of care for the elderly should be considered not so much as an act of generosity, but as a repayment of a debt of gratitude." Pope Francis has been especially strong. Pope Francis has been especially strong in promoting care for the elderly. If anyone is looking for a topic for a master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation, this is a good one. Francis talks about the caring for our elders and connecting them with young people all the time. I direct you to Amoris Laetitia numbers 191 to 93 among any places, where he tells us that our elders are a living part of our community. The phrase reminds me of a phrase from the Akan tribe in Ghana. They call senior citizens living ancestors. A good attitude, living ancestors. So let me direct you to the Bible for good examples of how we treat our elders well and poorly. These might be stories that young and old read together, and I bet that each would be surprised at how differently the story looks to the other. See how the young Elihu waits for Job and his elders to speak before he makes his points. Observe not only how young Ruth refuses to leave her mother-in-law Naomi, but how Naomi helps Ruth make good decisions with the wisdom of her long years. Do the matriarchs, the patriarchs, and the prophets continually tell us to honor our mothers and fathers because we're not and need to be reminded? Can we learn patience, especially about waiting for children and then grandchildren from Sarah and Abraham, Elizabeth and Zechariah? Can our young people understand that wisdom comes from experience by reading about Moses' travails, or the stamina of faith presented by the many mothers and grandmothers who stood by Jesus when the men ran away? Let's look at Anna and Simeon. Models of praise and patience. They're prophets, even though we're used to looking at prophets as being young, like Jeremiah. You know the story, it's in Luke 2. We mark as the Feast of the Presentation on February 2nd. Simon is not given an age, but we learn he's a righteous man waiting for his death, which Yahweh said wouldn't come until he laid eyes on the Messiah. Anna is given a very precise age, 84. A holy woman who came to the temple every day, like our own elders who attend daily Mass. Think of it. Old Anna and Simeon are the first people after Mary and Joseph the shepherds and the magi, to see Jesus as he truly was and then to proclaim it. Preaching on this feast a few years ago, Pope Francis turned things around. It's a meeting between young people who are full of joy for the action of the Holy Spirit. It's a unique encounter between observance and prophecy, where young people are the observers and the elderly are prophetic. You may have noticed that Francis likes to turn things around. Speaking not long after his election in Brazil at World Youth Day, he said, "The elderly are also the future of a people." Older people are often thought of as an end. They're no longer useful. They can be disposed. Francis says no. And he presents Simeon and Anna as examples. The elderly are also the future of a people. Our elders, Anna and Simeon, teach our young people several spiritual lessons. They teach us to keep praying. They teach us to have faith that God's timing is not our timing. They teach us to have trust, even if God's promise is taking longer than we'd like. Finally, they teach us that when we hear good news, we can't keep it to ourselves. Even at the end of their lives, these two prophetic senior citizens were still paying it forward. They biblically bridged the generation gap. We can make that happen in our own communities on special days and every day, any day. Pope Francis has introduced an annual celebration. It's the fourth Sunday in July, the World Day for Grandparents and the Elderly. We don't talk about Jesus having grandparents, do we? But Jesus had grandparents, Joachim and Anna. Talk to your kids about that. But let's not allow one day to do the trick. We don't need an anniversary to tell our spouses we love them. We don't need to wait for Mother's Day to buy flowers. There are plenty of things we can do throughout the year. Francis gives us papal homework. Speaking a few days after his own 80th birthday in 2016, he said to a group of youngsters, "Speak to your grandparents. Ask them questions. They have the memory of history, the experience of living, and this is a great gift for you that will help you on your journey." Where can this happen? Many places. The first commitment is to make a priority whether you're a grandparent, parent, or younger person. Don't say, "I don't have the time." As I tell my university students, if you can't find the time, make the time. Once you've done that, here are just a few ideas. But you, not I, you are the pastoral ministers. Families are separated. Pair up a grandparent without grandchildren nearby in your parish with grandchildren without local grandparents, and then do any of these activities. Set up a movie night. One time the elder chooses, the next the younger, and talk all the way through it. Explain things to each other while the parents maybe get a night out for a date they haven't had in years. Oral interviews. Our seniors will not always be with us. We've heard their stories, but have we preserved them? Have young people documented their elders' experiences by taping so video and audio can last beyond their lifetimes? Start with the funny stories we've all heard. Prompt them to tell the stories they've never told, but time is running out. What was it like when you came to this country? When you dated? When you started school? When something happened to you? What is your greatest regret? Maybe tie this to children's sacramental preparation and life lessons. Grandma, what was your first communion like? Grandpa, did you get confirmed? Tell me about Mommy's baptism. Tell me about mine. Volunteer together. You were a refugee. How can we help refugees today? Ask the tough questions. Did you ever doubt God? Were you afraid you wouldn't get a job? What did you think when your sister got cancer? How did you get through it? Did you ever march for a political or social cause? What happens? Were you scared? What was the cost? What helped you do the hard things? Would you do it again? Make the extraordinary ordinary. Elders aren't quick with tech. Teenagers are. Have the young people help grandma with her laptop and Zoom. Create mentors and proteges. Pair an experienced retired person with a certain skill with a young person thinking of picking that skill up. It could be anything: plumbing, nursing, social work, electrician, teacher, bus driver, a person starting their own business. And now my favorite: cook together. This is my mother Joan and our daughter Grace, the night before Thanksgiving, where they always make coconut cream pie. Share the family recipes. Write them down, even if you've never done that before, especially if you've never measured. Figure out a handful of this, a pinch of that. And then tell the story that goes with the recipe: a feast, a wedding, a birthday, or no special event at all, but something you just love to make. It might go something like this: when we came to this country, we couldn't find this ingredient, so we substituted that. When we didn't have enough food, we stretched it this way. And then eat together. As often as possible, reclaim the dinner table with no smartphones. Let me conclude. Just last month, Pope Francis directed our attention to the biblical figure of Judith, who lived to be 105. She spent her older years giving out wisdom, telling stories, passing on the lessons. As St. Francis said, the life of our communities must know how to benefit from the talents and charisms of so many elderly people who are already retired, but who are a wealth to be treasured. A wealth to be treasured. On the part of the elderly themselves, this requires a creative attention, a new intention, a generous availability. The previous skills of active life lose their constraint and become resources to be given away. Teaching, advising, building, caring, listening, preferably in favor of the most disadvantaged, who cannot afford any learning or who are abandoned in their loneliness. I ask our seniors to pay it forward for as long as you can. I ask our youngsters to listen, to learn, and to act in ways that honor our elders. Thank you.
We heard a lot of wisdom today from those speakers from across the globe, and it's only been just the morning session. I hope you enjoyed those highlights. EWTN will continue with our coverage of the 10th World Meeting of Families throughout the event. But if you miss any part of it, head over to EWTN's YouTube page where you can see the complete programming, and make sure to go to EWTN.com to see the programming times in your area. God bless.